I don't know if you were paying attention to the words that you were singing just now, but the first verse, the first couple of lines of that last song that we sang says, "On a hill far away stood an old rugged cross, the emblem or symbol of suffering and shame." And it's kind of interesting that we take that symbol, that emblem of suffering and shame, and we have made it our symbol of Christianity, right? Anywhere that you go in the world, if you want to figure out where believers are gathering, you can look for a cross. We take this cross and we put it on necklaces and wear it around our neck. But that has become kind of the symbol of who we are as a people and what matters to us most. Today we are talking about symbols, and we are talking about a symbol of our faith. It's a little bit different than the cross, and so I'll get into that in just a minute, but I just want to get you thinking about symbols for a second. So I want you to do something in participation with me. We did this a few weeks ago. I know people don't like talking out loud in church, but I want you to talk, and not only talk, I want you to say it loud enough for the person in front of you to clearly hear what you were saying. Okay, so I'm going to show you some symbols in just a minute. And as I show you these symbols, I just want you to tell me what these symbols represent. These are not hard. These are not difficult. I'm not trying to trick you in any way. I didn't put the symbol of the artist formerly known as Prince, something like that you may have no idea. What is that thing up there? These are things that kids that can't even read yet know most of what these are, okay? So as the symbol comes up on the screen, you tell me what this represents. Here's the first one. McDonald's. We started easy, right? Make it really simple here. This is a symbol that people all over the world know. In fact, it's amazing to me how much McDonald's has played into our vocabulary and our culture and everything else. We have one member of our family that I won't call by name, JD, but there was a period of time, for a long period of time after we were dating and married, where every chicken nugget in the world was called a McNugget, right? And we would go to restaurants, and some of you are looking at me like, is it not a McNugget? If you go to a different restaurant, it's not a McNugget, okay? I just want to fill you in. But we would go to other restaurants, and she would order McNuggets, and I'd be like, oh, it's not a McNugget. That's how much this symbol has influenced our world. So that's the first one. Let me show you another one. What is this? Nike, right? Everybody knows this. And this is one of those weird symbols that, regardless of what color you make it, you still know it is Nike. You can't really change the color of the McDonald's arch, right? But everybody knows this regardless of what color it is. All right, here's another one. What is this?
Sorry.
And here's another one. What is this? Starbucks. There you go. This says, I read this week that this has become the most recognized symbol in all of the world. More so than the McDonald's arches, more than anything else. And so I don't know how they figure out that this is the most recognized one in the world, but it's on the internet, and so I believe it, right? So we recognize this. All of those that we've looked at so far are brands, they are companies, they're organizations, right? And we know that they represent something. If you buy something with the Nike swoosh on it, you know what you're getting. If you walk into a Starbucks, you know what that represents. You know what you're getting. If you walk into a McDonald's and go through the doors with that golden arch on it, you know what you're getting. There are other symbols in the world that don't represent organizations necessarily, but they still mean something to us when we see them. So I want you to identify a few of those for me, all right? So here's the next symbol. Red Cross. It's funny, everybody has said that all weekend long, even though I just said I'm not thinking of organizations here. This also can represent like first aid, right? Or healthcare, whatever. If you go to another country and you are sick or you need to find a doctor, you look for this symbol, right? If you see this symbol and it's in green, that means welcome to Colorado, right? So you don't see that everywhere in the world, but you do see it here. All right, let me show you one more, or a couple more. What does this represent? Restrooms, yeah. And this is another one of those that's starting to get blurred a little bit. How that can get blurred, I have no idea. But it is, right? But the symbol is supposed to tell you something. Like we just said, if there's a symbol of a man on the door, when you walk through the door, it should tell you that as you walk in, there may be men standing inside of this room. There may be specific things for men inside of this room. If it's a woman, there may be specific things for women inside this room, right? So these symbols tell us something. The last one, what does this one represent? Marriage, right? And we all know this one. It's a symbol. Maybe you've been to a wedding where the preacher held up the ring and said, hey, it's an unbroken circle representing love that is unending. And this is a symbol of what marriage is supposed to be like. So these are all symbols you know and you recognize. Wherever you go in the world, you can see these symbols and it means something to you, right? You understand what they mean as soon as you see these symbols. In our faith, we have symbols that represent things to us. Just like the cross we talked about a minute ago. That is a symbol of our faith. Even though it used to be a symbol of suffering and anguish, it is now a symbol of Christianity. If you pay attention to the back of cars, you may see this little ictus, this Jesus fish, right? That is a symbol of our faith, and it has a whole story. We don't have time to get into all of that today, but you've seen those. We today are going to be talking about a symbol that there's really no icon for, but this is a huge symbol in terms of our faith, in terms of Christianity, in terms of who we are as a people. And the symbol that we are going to be talking about this morning is actually mentioned on every one of you should have had a little postcard on your seat when you walk in. It's mentioned on the front of that. The symbol that we're going to be talking about for a few minutes is baptism. And specifically, I want us to kind of answer the question, why do we do this? I don't know if you've ever stopped and thought about that, but it's kind of a weird thing to do baptisms. If you didn't grow up around the church, if you haven't spent a whole lot of time around people that have been baptized, you may look at that and say, that is just weird. You know, get a guy or a person up on a stage and you dunk them underwater and you bring them back up and everybody's staring at them and clapping and all. Why in the world do we do that? Is it just tradition? Is it something else? Why do we do this? What does the Bible say about this practice that is a central piece to who we are as believers? That's the question I hope we're going to answer this morning. I remember when I was baptized, I was 7 years old when I was baptized. And some people hear that and say, wow, that's really young, you know. But it was so real. And I remember it like it was yesterday. I was, like I said, I was 7. I was in a church that was a large church. And they had a baptistry kind of behind the stage area, you know. And so as I got baptized, they did one other thing. They made you wear these white robes. Did any of you have an experience like that in churches? Did you have to wear a white robe? Okay, so yeah, I was 7, probably the only time I looked like an angel that whole year, right? But I had to wear this robe that had these wings on it, and you go up there and you get dunked under the water. And my grandfather was a pastor. He was the one that actually baptized me, and it was just a special moment that shaped the rest of my life. It really did. And so, you know, it's something that a lot of us have been a part of, but it still may seem a little bit strange. You know, why do we do this? Our family met another family. Actually, JD met somebody. This is the way it always works. I don't meet anybody. JD meets everybody and then brings me into the relationship, right? She met a guy at the cell phone place. She was having something done to her cell phone and started a conversation with one of the guys that was working there. And before too long, the guy finds out we're planning a church. This is not long after Trailhead had started. And as they talk about that, for whatever reason, the conversation goes to, well, hey, why don't you come over and have dinner with us soon? And so that family shows up at our house. They have dinner. It was the first time we had really hung out with them. And as they come, they bring their newborn baby with them. I mean, it was a couple of months old, the brand new baby that they had. And this is a family that was not really a church family. He didn't grow up around the church. She went to a Catholic church, kind of, you know, like Christmas and Easter maybe, growing up. But they really didn't have a whole lot of experience with the church. They didn't put a whole lot of thought into faith and what that means in life. But one of the reasons they wanted to come over after the conversation was had about us being church planters was they wanted to come over and ask us, will you baptize our baby? And it's kind of one of those things that it's like, why do you want to do this? You know, if you're not a part of a church, if faith is not a big deal in your life, why is it so important that you would ask us to baptize your child? And so it's this weird thing where on one side we see people outside the church that look at baptism and say that's just strange, and on the other side there are people that maybe they're not even connected to the church, but they say, I want that for my family. I want that to be a part of our faith tradition. And if we ask the question again, why would we think that way? I think typically the answer is one of two things. Typically the answer is, I want to be baptized, or I want my child to be baptized because it's tradition. That's what we do. You know, and yeah, I may not go to church except once a year or whatever, but my mother was baptized, and my grandmother and my grandfather, they were baptized. So I want to carry that on in my family. It's tradition. Or maybe it's the tradition of the church you grew up around, right? That's the first reason that a lot of people get baptized. And I don't want to burst any bubbles this morning, but let me just tell you, that's not the reason to get baptized. That's not what Scripture says. That's not what the Bible says in terms of why this matters. Yeah, another reason that I think a lot of people get baptized is because, and this may sound weird, because of superstition. And what I mean by that is a lot of people say, I want to get baptized because I believe this is going to help my relationship with God. This is going to make things right between me and God. So when I die, when I end up face to face with God in eternity, He will let me in heaven because I've been baptized, right? Again, I don't want to be harsh with this, but can I just tell you, that's superstition. That's not why the church continues to do baptism. In fact, there's nowhere in Scripture that indicates that your baptism is going to get you into heaven. It's not there. In fact, what Scripture is really clear about is it's clear about the fact that salvation is about Jesus and what Jesus is doing in us. It's not Jesus and anything else that we do. It's not Jesus plus this and this and this. It's just this relationship with Jesus. That's what it's all about. And so I don't think there's going to be a day where you get to heaven and God looks at you and He says, well, why should I let you into heaven? And you look at Him and you say, well, I got wet in front of a lot of people, and I really think that should count for something, right? I don't think that's going to be the answer. That's not the why. That's superstition. So what is it that makes this unique? What is it that makes this something that the church has continued to do for thousands of years? What is it that drives people to do this? Why do we do it according to the Bible? And I guess let me just stop there for a second. Let me ask you this. As you've looked at the Bible, is baptism important? Does the Bible encourage us to do this? Yeah, it does. Yeah, I mean, if you have been around the church for a while, you may be familiar with the words of Jesus, where just before he had died, he was raised from the dead, and he appeared to the disciples just before he ascends back to heaven. He speaks to them and he gives them kind of a directive in Matthew chapter 28. And this is what he says to them. He says, Matthew 28 verse 18 says, Then Jesus came to them and said, All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I commanded you. You may have heard that before, right? That's a familiar saying, but what Jesus is doing is one of the last statements he makes to his disciples before he ascends back to heaven is, make disciples, encourage people to follow me, and as part of that, as you're doing that, baptize them. Apparently it matters. Even though it's weird, even though it's strange, apparently it matters to Jesus. The early church practices this. In fact, there's a point, we won't look at it right now, but there's a point where 3,000 people come to faith in one day after Peter preaches on a day called Pentecost. And it tells us that that day they were baptized and added to the number of those who were considered the church. That day. So it's not like they waited and said, well, let me see if I feel good about this later on. You know, it's not like the church said, well, you want to get baptized, but we need to observe you and see if you're really ready for this. No, the day they accepted Jesus, they were baptized. Why? Why does this matter? Why is it in Scripture? Why is it important? Why do we get wet in front of a bunch of people if it's just a symbol? I think Romans chapter 6 helps answer that question for us. And so that's where I want to hang out for a few minutes this morning. Romans 6, we'll read the first several verses there. But before we just dive into that, let me give you a little background here, okay? What leads up to this is obviously chapters 1 through 5 of Romans, if you look at Romans. So the first 3 chapters of Romans, basically Paul is saying one thing. He's making one argument. He's saying this. He's saying every one of us are born sinners. Every one of us are born into sin. Another way to think about that, if this makes more sense, is we all inherit certain things just by being born, right? We inherit our parents' DNA. We know that. Some of the reasons that we have the physical traits that we have are because of our parents' DNA. And so you may have your dad's eyes, or you may have your mom's smile, or you may be the same height as, your Aunt Betty, or whatever it is. But we all have this DNA. We have a genetic code that shapes us physically into who we are, right? And what Paul is saying in the first 3 chapters of Romans is he's saying, in the same way, when you were born with essentially a spiritual DNA. And that spiritual DNA is handed down to you from your parents. That means if they did things that were not right to God in their lives, they handed that down to you, spiritually speaking, in your spiritual DNA. That may sound kind of strange, but he's saying the problem is we're all born with this. It is part of every one of our lives. Every single one of us comes into this world born into sin. So that's what the first part of Romans talks about. And as we get to Romans chapter 6, what he's going to do is he's going to say, how do we deal with that? What's the answer to that problem of us being born with spiritually defiled DNA? How does that get rectified? How does that get made right in our lives? And then he's going to tie this to baptism, okay? So it's kind of a weird thing, but just follow me, and he's going to tie all of this together in a second. Romans chapter 6, starting in verse 1, he says this, "What shall we say then? Shall we go on sinning so that grace may increase?" So the argument that he's presenting is one that would have been talked about during his day, where people are saying, okay, if I'm born sinful, maybe I should just keep on sinning. And when I do that, God forgives me and his love and grace are shown. And so he is glorified by me sinning. He looks better every time I sin because he takes care of it and he's gracious, right? That's what some people were saying during this time. And that would be their answer to the problem of being born sinful is, oh, you just keep doing it and it makes God look good, right? And so Paul asked that question, is that what we should do? Is that the answer to this? And in verse 2, he answers it. He says, by no means. So absolutely not. That is not the answer. He says, we died to sin. How can we live in it any longer? That phrase, we died to sin, is important because I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but honestly, the only way to get rid of the problem of sin is we die. One way or the other, we die to get out of that problem in life. Right? And that could be that we die, meaning we die with Jesus, we die to the things of the world, and we listen to God alone and not the world. Could mean we die in that way, or it could just mean we physically die at the end of life and finally, okay, I'm finally out of this circle of temptation and sin that I've been in for so long, right? But death has to happen in order for the sin nature to be completely gone, one way or the other. And so Paul takes that idea and now he's going to tie it into baptism in verse 3. Verse 3 says, or don't you know that all of us who were baptized into Christ were baptized into his death? Any of you guys consider yourselves scholars in Greek by any chance? Yeah, me either. I mean, yeah, right, I know a little bit, just enough to be dangerous probably. Here, you can take this that I'm about to give you though and go impress your friends later, okay? The word baptism or baptize that he keeps using here is one that's really easy to remember in the Greek because it's just baptizo, right? It's like almost the same thing, you add it up to the end, right? And the word in the Greek is a word that's used all over the Greek world outside of the Bible. So it's not like the Bible is the only place that talks about this. Outside of the Bible, do you know what this word represents, what it means? It literally means to drown, to die by drowning, to be dunked under the water to the point of death. And he's taking that word and he's saying this is becoming a symbol of who we are as a people. The very next verse, he kind of unpacks that a little bit. Verse 4, he says, we were therefore buried with him through baptism. So it says, here's the symbol. Here's what baptism looks like. You're buried. You're dunked under the water. You're drowned, right? You died to your old way of life. You were buried with Christ. And then he goes on and says, in order that just as Christ was raised from the dead through the glory of the Father, we too may live a new life. So that's what baptism is. That's the what. We're drowned. We die to our old way of life. We die to us being in charge. And we're raised back to life just as Jesus was raised after 3 days. Living according to him now, not according to what I want. So that's the what of baptism. Verse 5, he talks a little further and says this. He says, if we have been united with him like this in his death, we will certainly also be united with him in his resurrection. That word united, and again, I'm no Greek scholar. We typically don't talk about words in this way a whole lot. But that word united is important. It is actually a word that has its root in agricultural terms. So if you're a farmer, if you have a green thumb, or if you have a goat just to fit in Wellington, this should be important to you, right? This word, like I said, is a word that literally means grafted. If you have a King James version of the Bible, it reads really strangely here. It says that we have been planted with him in his death, which is like, what in the world does that mean? But they're playing on that agricultural idea. And again, the idea is that united means we have been grafted in. If you take a living tree and you graft another branch from a different type tree into that, you create this kind of hybrid, right? You create a hybrid where you used to have two individuals, now you've got one thing that is living together. And that's the whole picture. That baptism is uniting us. It's part of showing us that we are united with Christ. We are grafted into him so that his life and ours are commingling now. The two have become one. Is there anything else that you can think of in our society that represents that, where two are individuals and they become one? Marriage. Exactly. And so I think part of what Paul is saying here is he's saying this symbol of baptism is kind of like the wedding ring of your relationship with Jesus. You guys all know how this works, right? If I take this wedding ring off, first of all, I have it on as a declaration of the fact that I am married. My life has been joined with another life, right? If I take this wedding ring off and put it aside, or if I accidentally lose it down the drain, or whatever the case may be, does that mean I'm not married anymore? No. I think my wife would be pretty upset if I didn't wear it and that meant I wasn't married anymore, right? Because I take it off every night. I can't sleep in that kind of stuff, whatever. So it's not a sign that I'm not married anymore, but when I'm wearing this, it is a public declaration that my life is united to another's. My world has been grafted in with the world of another person. And now we are doing life as one. Baptism is the wedding ring of your relationship with God. It is the statement, it is the symbol to the rest of the world that I am publicly declaring my allegiance to God. That now I am not doing life based on just what I want. I am doing life based on us doing life together. We are united as one. And that's kind of the first part of the why, to why we get baptized, because it is a public declaration of our faith. It's a public declaration that we're going to do the rest of life with Jesus, right? But that's not the only thing. That's not the only reason why. In fact, the next two verses help us understand a little bit further the second part of the why of baptism. So listen to these quickly with me. Verse 6 says, "For we know that our old self is crucified with him, so that the body of sin might be done away with. That we should no longer be slaves to sin, because anyone who has died has been freed from sin." So he comes back to this argument. Remember where he started in chapter 6? He comes back to this argument where he's saying, we have this sin problem. We're born with it. We struggle with it. We live with it in a way we don't like to, right? What's the answer to that? Well, the answer is not that we fix it all ourselves, because we can't. The answer is that we unite with Jesus, and he fixes it for us. Is that, like, as we are grafted together with Jesus, it's almost like his DNA is stronger than our DNA, and so his DNA covers our sin nature. Does that mean that we never mess up again? No, absolutely not. Does that mean we never sin ever again? No. Let's be honest. I mean, who really believes that, right? It doesn't mean that at all. But what it means is that his DNA is stronger than our DNA spiritually, and he covers us. That's what the Bible calls atonement. We can get into that at some other point in time. But as we are grafted with him, he takes care of the sin problem that we couldn't take care of on our own. And that's the second part of the why that is so important. That is why, to me, this symbol is so amazing, it's so incredible. Because it's a twofold thing. So again, the first part of this, if we were to wrap it into one statement, the first part of this is that I truly believe baptism is a public declaration that we're dedicating the remainder of our lives to Jesus Christ. It's a declaration. It is the wedding ring. It is a public thing stating to the world, I am totally dependent on God. That's the first half of the why. But the second part is this. Not only are we dedicating our lives to him, but the and is he is reshaping our sinful nature into his image. That's why this is so good. That's why this is so exciting, because he is doing, it's a public thing that's happening on the outside, but he is doing something on the inside that we could never do. And this being put under the water and brought back up is a statement that, yes, he's doing something in me externally, but it's from the inside out where this really matters. It's from the inside out where this is making a huge difference. And I want the world to know that I could not do this apart from Jesus and being united to him. Isn't that good news? That's exactly what God says to do this for. That's why for 2,000 years believers have continued to do this. Not because it's good tradition. Not because it helps us, win brownie points in God's eyes. But because it's a public declaration that I'm dedicating the rest of my life to Jesus, and he is reshaping me into his image instead of this sinful nature that I was born into. As we get ready to wrap up this morning, every one of you have one of these cards that should have been in your chairs as you sat down. I want to ask you, every one of you, to grab one of these cards with me. I want to do something a little bit different as we wrap up this morning. Grab one of these cards, grab a pen. If there are any pens left in the seat backs in front of you, grab one of those. And I want every one of us to fill out this card in one of three ways, okay? It's a baptism connection card. You can see on there, it gives a place for your name, your email, your phone number, and a chance to say, hey, I want to get baptized at one of these times. But what I want you to do is this. I want you to look at that, and first of all, everybody put your name on there, all right? But the next part is where your cards may be different from others. So if you have done this previously, if you have stepped into baptism, if you have been baptized, and you say, you know what, I did this as a child or whatever, and this is a public declaration that I have made, I just want you to write in the email or phone or whatever, baptized, just to let us know I've done that. That this is something that, yes, I publicly stated with my faith that I want to follow Jesus. If you're here today, and this is option number 2, if you're here today and you say, you know what, I've been kind of wrestling with this, but I'm still just not sure. I think that's where I think I want to be essentially married to Jesus. I think I want to give my life to him completely, but I'm not ready yet. If you're at that point, I just want you to put under your name, not yet. That doesn't mean we're going to rope you later and force you into this. That just means, I'm still wrestling with it, and it's not time for me yet. I'll figure it out later. If you're at the point where you say, you know what, I am following Jesus, and I've made him a part of my life, and I really think this is important. I want to be baptized, and I have not before. We just ask that you would fill out the rest of the information. So put your email and your phone number so we can follow up with you. And then check one of 2 times down at the bottom where we're going to have baptism services coming up that would work for your schedule. So the first opportunity is just a few weeks from now, Easter. Now, Easter weekend, we're going to have 5 services. You won't have to get baptized 5 times, okay? One time. You just pick a service, and we'll let you get baptized at Easter. If that doesn't work for you, maybe Saturday, July 6th. That's our next time that we're doing baptism. And that time, we're going to go actually down to the Poudre River to a place called Picnic Rock where we've done baptisms in the past. And if the Easter date doesn't work, maybe that date works for you. But you just let us know on there that this is what God is prompting me to do. I want to be baptized, and we'll follow up from there. If you're still at the point where you're saying, yeah, I get it, I understand the why, but this is nerve-wracking, and I'm not sure that I want to do this. I want to just show you what baptisms at Trailhead looks like. Okay? I want to show you a quick video of some of the baptisms that have happened here at Trailhead. And one of the things that I want you to notice is that after every single baptism that you see, there's a celebration. There's clapping, there's excitement, there's joy. That's what we want people to experience here. It's not oh, that's weird, they're standing up there and they look like they just took a shower. It's, man, look at the symbol that they have just shown with their life, that they are grafted in to the things of God. And now they are doing life based on what he says. So watch this video with me quickly and just see it's not that. Good stuff. We haven't drowned anybody yet, physically. So, no, it's so good that we get to be a part of this. And yeah, it's a strange symbol. It's different than most of anything else you see in the world. But it's a symbol that matters. It's a symbol that says, you know what, my life has changed, and I want the world to know. It has changed not because of the good that I have done, but it's changed because of what Jesus is doing. In just a minute, we're going to pass the offering baskets because it's the first weekend of the month. But what I would ask is that as you have the offering basket passed in front of you, you would just take your card and drop it in there. We're not going to bug you about this or harass you, but we do want to be able to pray with you and praise God. If you've been baptized, we want to praise God for that. If you want to be baptized, we want to follow up with you in that. If you're not ready yet, we're not going to press you and bug you on that, I promise you. But just drop this in and let us know how we can be praying for you going forward.